I keep coming back to how the work we do, the personal growth we do, and the growth we do in our local communities, it's never wasted time. It's hard work. Growing is work. There's pain involved in growing.
Hello, and welcome to What is a Rite of Passage? Our guest today is Ian Lillington. Ian is an author and a teacher on the principles of permaculture, and he is one of the pioneering founders of Castlemaine Rites of Passage. We acknowledge the Jara people, the traditional custodians of the land on which this is being recorded. We acknowledge elders and knowledge holders, past, present, and future, and may their ceremonies and initiations be remembered, and may this feed and heal the country on which we live, work, and play. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Fantastic. Where are you coming from and what are you bringing?
Well, I'm sitting in my home in Campbell's Creek, which is on the southern edge of Castlemaine, and I'm looking out at some fruit trees, which I'm proud of. We're getting a good crop this year: pears and peaches and figs, and yeah, I'm feeling content to be at home and having some of the food on the table has been grown here, which is one of the aims of my life, is to have a garden and eat from it. More broadly, at the moment, I'm doing a lot of permaculture teaching, and I'm also doing permaculture administration because we're trying to have a national conference next year, which is quite a big task. That's voluntary work. And in the background, there's rites of passage, which is what we're here to talk about, because I've been involved in rites of passage for more than 20 years now. And in fact, it was about this time 20 years ago when my oldest son was around 14 years old, and his mum said, "Oh, I've seen this thing about rites of passage. Why don't you and Rowan go and do that?" And I think it's up right up front. It's important to notice how a lot of times when a teenager or a man gets on rites of passage, it's actually the woman who's noticed it and who's encouraged it, and that's a great thing. So it was exactly my story. Um, I was about 44 years old. We had three children. So my oldest was 14, and two younger boys as well. I thought we were doing pretty well, but I also had a lot of stresses in life looking back, sort of classic middle life situation of trying to juggle earning some money, being with the family, going to do the things that I wanted to do in my own life. And this was in South Australia, and the group I mentioned was called the Kangaroo Island Rites of Passage. And since 1993, they've been taking teenagers over, mainly, well, from the mainland over to Kangaroo Island, which is only a 13-kilometer crossing on the ferry, but it's a big adventure. Because Kangaroo Island's relatively remote. There's a bit of a journey to get to the ferry, and then there's at least another hour in the dark, in the bush, out into the wilds of Western Kangaroo Island. And I joined in that, took along my son. He didn't object, but I don't think he really knew much about what to expect. As it turned out, I didn't know what to expect either, because I thought I was just there in the background, going to sit around, drink some tea, maybe cook a bit of food, have a chat to some blokes. But in fact, all the fathers, as well as their sons, were going through the rites of passage. They didn't tell us that until we got there. So in fact, over the next 2 days, I was doing all the things the teenagers were. And there were other men of various ages also there, from like 20 years old up to maybe 50, 60 years old. We were all doing our rites of passage. That was over a 48-hour period, and we got to sleep out on our own in a strange place. We got to cook together, talk together. On the second night, it poured with rain. I got, soaked through to the skin, and it was, a fully memorable experience. Um, and then 6 months after that, I'll go back a little. We had already been discussing moving from South Australia to Central Victoria because we had quite a lot of friends around here. And my work in sustainability was really taking off around here. Castlemaine was starting a sustainability group. Hepburn Shire was doing a lot of work on sustainability and permaculture. And I was finishing a job in Adelaide in June 2006, which was working with organic farmers, but it was a short term contract. And I threw in threw in my threw in the towel, or threw what's the word? Not throwing in the towel. I just took my chance, took a leap, and we moved over to Castlemaine, which was already a bit of a centre for sustainability and has since then gone from strength to strength with being a great place to do eco housing, to grow food, to share in our local community, to get support from each other. And then by the time we found a house, moved to into settled down in this area, got the kids settled in school, it was time to think about my second son, who was getting towards the age of 14. And I continued to be in touch with friends in South Australia, in particular a guy called Tresh, which comes from Trevor, Tresh, Tresh, almost like trash, but the very opposite of trash. Tresh is one of the greatest men I know, and I kept in touch with him. I said, "Could some of you Kangaroo Island guys come over to Castlemaine, and we'll camp together, and we'll look around and see if we can find a place to do rites of passage." And over the next 2 years, Derek and Greg and Trish and a couple of others from South Australia came over, and they did exactly that. So we seeded the rites of passage activity from Kangaroo Island over to Castlemaine. And the Kangaroo Island one keeps going. We've now been going for 33 years, and we did our first rites of passage here in 2010. It would have been probably done in 2009, but we had the big bushfires here in February 2009. We had Black Saturday, and there's a huge amount of community energy goes into recovery after bushfires. So my own personal energy and a lot of others was diverted. But by 2010, we got our own local rites of passage happening, and there were quite a few men really ready for it. There were other men stepping forward, and teenagers. And so we did a men and teenagers rites of passage in 2010, 2011, and we were doing them in the spring, but we decided we preferred the autumn. So we had a break in 2012, and then we started in autumn 2013. And since then, pretty much every year there's been rites of passage, either in the autumn or the spring. Some years we've actually done them in both times, autumn and spring. Interestingly, the demand has increased from men who don't have teenage boys to take along. There's a lot of men who want to go and do rites of passage, regardless of whether they have children or not. And so more of our events have been what we call single men events. They may not be single in their marital status, but they're coming on their own. They're coming without children. And so we continue to run both of those models. There's two really big things for me about ROP. Because I've been involved in a lot of other community groups. One thing is that this group has really been self-sustaining. There's quite a few groups
Mm.
I've helped set up where if you're one of the originators, that people tend to think you're going to keep on doing it forever, and people tend to think that you're the one who's going to do it. I've enjoyed being able to take a step back from being really central within this rites of passage group, and others have come along. So by the time we got to, say, 2014, we'd done 4 rites of passage, and quite a few of the men who'd done those early ROPs were really keen to come back and be leaders. Well, they were already coming back to be leaders. So there is a self-sustaining nature to this group, which is unusual and enjoyable to be not having to sort of hold the whole thing. And I think that that's really quite different to a lot of community groups. Um, Another thing about this is how we have been able to support others in Victoria um, to not exactly replicate what we've been doing, but we have had many meaningful conversations with people around the Daylesford area, with people around Geelong, people in the northeast of Victoria. They haven't necessarily exactly replicated what we do, and in any case, we didn't replicate what the Kangaroo Island guys do. But there has become a steady increase in the interest in doing ROP and in learning from each other and networking with each other. Hmm. So the first thing that I've been enjoying about this rites of passage as a group is how over 20 years it's kept on growing, and it's recruiting new blood and keeping some of us old guys around as well. The second thing I really learned from this rites of passage was how creative the guys in South Australia were, because back in the 90s, when I was a young father, I heard about the idea of rites of passage, and I heard about it being a traditional thing that most people in the Western world didn't have a rites of passage anymore. And wasn't it sad? Like, oh, it's so sad we don't have a rites of passage anymore. And I just left it
Yeah.
at that. But these guys in South Australia, they said, well, we can have a rites of passage. We've got these
Mm.
teenage sons; they need a rite of passage. Let's work out how to do it. And they read widely and they watched documentaries and they talked to each other and they developed something. And we're really honored to be able to share what they developed. And I think Rites of Passage has really taken off in lots of directions, and the diversity is excellent. And I just want to share my admiration for those men back in the 90s who thought beyond what I thought, and they thought, "Let's do this. We need this, and we can do it," and they did it. It's a great thing. Rites of passage, for me, has gone really hand in hand with men's groups. I was involved in a men's group before I was involved in rites of passage, and
Mhm.
I assume, I'm pretty sure that women's rites of passage and women's groups have a bit of an overlap as well. You don't have to do a rites of passage to join a men's group, and if you're in a men's group, you may have nothing to do with rites of passage or vice versa. But for me, and I think a lot of men, it's been an important discovery that you can sit with other men and have heartfelt conversations, and that can happen once a week, once a fortnight, once a month, maybe around a fire in the back garden, maybe going for a walk in the bush. And certainly since I've been about 35 years old, that has been an important part of my life, to have that
Mm.
connection with men. And to find so many men who have no interest at all in sitting and talking about the footy, no interest in sitting and
Mm.
just drinking beer together. Men's groups, for me, have always consistently been alcohol free, which is not a big deal for me, but it is for some. And they've also been free of that silly talk, which ever since I was a teenager, I really disliked how boys and then men had to always be proving themselves, all the time, proving themselves better than whoever else was around them. And the men's groups I've been in have often touched me very deeply because of the support that we give each other, support that I've felt, support that I've given men who have, it's really quite hard to talk about this without getting emotional, but men who can, for often the first time in their life, find a space where it's safe to talk about their problem with drinking, or their how do they handle not getting sex in their marriage, or how do they handle dealing with the suicide of a family member. Yeah, really
Mm.
substantial stuff, which despite the availability of counseling, despite the endless amount of stuff on documentaries and internet and whatever about opening up, being safe. Um, these these almost invisible men's groups have provided for me, and they provided for so many other men, um, a really significant space to have an environment where meaningful sharing can happen, and where you actually get listened to. And we don't try to solve problems, but we do create this space where people can speak and feel heard. And I think that's f- always going to be really important, a significant thing to happen. So in our area, men's groups provided the fuel, I suppose, or they provided a core of connection that has helped us keep rites of passage going. Because in a formal sense, rites of passage has become it's become a legal body. It's registered as an association. It's got insurance. People pay to do the rites of passage, so they pay for things like the renewing the incorporation of an organization that allows us to have insurance. The insurance costs probably $3,000 a year to run these events. These things are made possible by men getting together and getting a bit organized. Um, and at first, we simply said, "Well, we're just a bunch of guys going off into the bush and camping with our sons. Like, we don't need insurance. We don't need any legal stuff." But over the years, it's become more. It's become a harder to argue that you don't need that stuff, and B, we're doing it so often, and we're doing it in with a degree of risk taking, and so things like having insurance has become a sort of accepted part of what we're doing. But I mentioned that in the context of the emotional stuff as well, because it's sometimes it's necessary to do some of that legal and organizational stuff to make it possible to have these really deep and powerful sharing experiences.
You know, certainly something that I'm seeing in my role enrolling parents for a teenage rite of passage at the moment. Mothers want to know that the organisation that they're putting their kids out with is trustworthy, is legitimate, and it's amazing that there's so many willing volunteers in our organisation that are willing to do this work and pay this work forward. And we are volunteers,
Mm,
but yeah, there's a part of that legitimacy, and of the organisation that people want that safety in.
mm. Yeah, yeah, that's understandable. Things changed during 2021. I think we still have a clear need for community. We have a sense of community. We support each other in community. I think, but people's need for a bit more certainty about who's really speaking to them, who's really is this person even real when you get an email. And I don't just mean this hasn't just come from having a sort of global pandemic situation where it was hard to know who to trust, but there's additional levels of trust have to be built now. I think it's pretty true to say that 15, 20 years ago, I would just go down the road, jump on a minibus, and go with some guys I'd hardly met to another place in the remote bush and just take that risk. I understand entirely now why people want more reassurance before they do that.
Mm. Yeah, there's something that's
Mm,
landing for me, because yeah, to be honest, I am personally having a hard time communicating the benefits of the work that we do. And it's not that I don't believe in it. I believe in it more strongly than I ever have. I'm willing to sing it from the rooftops now. The benefits of rites of passage for a teenager, a father, and a mother. But it's it's like it's a tough sell. And when you mentioned the pandemic and what people's needs are after that time, I remember in my own feeling and communications with people, as we're locked down and we're losing access to community and we're losing access to nature, what as we started to crawl out of that, what I started to believe about humans was that, we realized that communication and connection is critical, that we need it, that this is a massive need. But then I watched something as we were all let out. It's like we had Stockholm syndrome or something. It's like we were suddenly safer in this contracted sense, and
Mm,
and I use these platforms to communicate with. It gives me convenience, but I could be making a lot more out of community. I know that, and I'm sort of in that thing myself. And I wonder, just as we're talking, if that's got anything to do with this. Yeah, this
mm,
level of trust that people may or may not have with a small grassroots organisation.
mm, 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 mm. Look, it the challenges of the world, wherever they're coming from, makes it more important than ever that we do this sort of thing.
Mm,
There were two winters, like the winter of 2020 and the winter of 21, where we were having rites of passage organizing groups, even though we couldn't deliver the actual event, and they were very important for keeping in touch. And, it's
mm,
fascinating, the ongoing commitment, because, there were quite a few times when you couldn't have visitors to your own home, but you could meet with up to 10 people on public land. And that's exactly what we did. We did our organizing groups on public land. We still found a place we could light a fire. Through the winter, we sat there, only a small fire, not enough to alarm the CFA, but, um,
mm,
but we did. We kept on meeting, and the connection was really important. And, Rites of Passage was one of the few community groups that I know that didn't get divided by the various opinions and deceptions and misinformation. And then, like this time 4 years ago, April, May 2022, in fact, it was March 22. We did our first ROP after having a bit of a break, and that was in March 22. We did a rites of passage for men without teenagers, and because there was a backlog, naturally we did a ROP for teenagers in May 22 as well. So we had them in quick succession, March and May 2022. There was a buildup of demand there. Um, but there's been a couple of times since then when we haven't got enough teenagers, and I think that this ability to commit, this need of more certainty, this caution around leaping into the
mm,
unknown is more visible. And yet we're going to be continued to facing we're going to continue to face unknowns and big challenges. And it's true. It's fair to say people make lifelong friendships through rites of passage, or maybe not lifelong, even if they only last a few years. That's great. And men's groups get set up after rites of passage, and connection continues to happen. So we are doing a
mm,
kind of community work, and when uh, when it's done well, and I think we as a group do it well, and we have a number of events really that the weekend or the 3 days and 3 nights away is the core. But before that, there's an information night when anyone comes along can ask any questions. And when we already set the scene a little bit by we sit in a big circle, everyone has a chance to speak, everyone introduces themselves, and anyone can ask any questions. And then 10 days before the event, there is a night when the mothers, fathers, and support people come along, and during that evening, this is when there's teenagers involved, there is a moment when, again, I'm always really emotional because there's, uh there's a moment during that evening when the mothers realize that their 14-year-old who that big noisy boy who they've actually wished, "Oh, I wish he'd get out from under my feet. I wish he'd get out of the house. I wish I had some more space." But there's a moment when they realize he's going. And that's such a powerful thing. And yeah, and I didn't expect it to affect me as much. But witnessing that with others, it's partly emotional because I've done it with my own sons, and I wonder, have I done it? Have I done it well enough? Did I? I got them on rites of passage. We didn't in those early days. We didn't do such a big farewell. That moment of separation wasn't so clear. But whether or not I did it right, like this really touches something universal, and it's quite a it's quite a challenge. I think in what you might call our cotton wool society, it's probably more than ever a challenge when generally your teenagers are sitting at home on the computer and you maybe don't know what they're doing on screen, but you do know they're just in the room next door. Um, it's a very different world to me as a teenager 50 years ago when pretty much teenagers were out on the streets. Parents
Mm.
and teenagers expected and found that distance, and we were probably getting into trouble down the street. But that was the way teenagers were out and separating then. Now, in this more digital environment, I think that separation experience that we do through ROP is even more significant.
'Cause I haven't been over to KI to have a look at the process there, and, yeah, from my understanding, at some point, some part of the party's gotta get on a ferry to go
Mm,
to the island to do the
mm,
process.
mm.
Um, how does how does that separation process and that, the reintegration process work with that, yeah, that 13-kilometer passage in the middle of the rite of passage?
Well, I want you to get my oldest son on as a guest because Rowan, who's now 34 years old, Rowan is one of the leaders and he takes people on that journey. And I'm
Beautiful.
pretty proud of that. And he's continued in this rites of passage group. Been back to quite a few camps. A couple of those originators who are now in their 70s, they're pretty much retired or has taken a big step back. The younger generation's coming along. Um, but yeah, in at a simple level, the traveling to an island, the getting on a ferry does emphasize, it does increase that separation. But because
Mm.
there's a because there's a journey, there's a drive to the ferry, the goodbye from the goodbye from the support people is not at the dockside. It's actually closer to Adelaide, and so the separation, the saying goodbye happens in not such a dramatic way. It would be
Mm,
more
mm.
dramatic, and I've discussed this with my son. Like maybe all the parents and support people should have to go to the ferry terminal and that could be the moment of departure. That could be the moment of separation and reintegration. It just mean it's more time, like, it would add 2 or 3 hours to everyone's day. It adds the petrol cost and so on. It may never happen, but maybe it will. And it's a great thing to me that every ROP is different. You could organize I've always had this picture that we could run a rites of passage in the middle of a town centre, and that people wouldn't even really notice. You can integrate rites of passage into almost any environment, I would say.
Mm. Yeah, I
Mm.
can imagine some ceremonial process of the mothers swimming after the ferry in
Yeah,
protest to taking their boys
yeah,
away.
yeah. Or look, in the days of mass migration on ships, they had paper streamers and they threw streamers, and as the ship sailed away, then the streamers were broken because that's another
Mm,
symbolic separation.
mm,
Most of us in like I migrated from England, but of course on an airplane, not on a boat. But there's that moment
yep,
when you are saying goodbye to your parents and your partner's parents, and you're taking their grandchild away from them to the other side of the world. Many of us have had these separation experiences. It may be why I'm so emotional about my my involvement with ROP, because I've had this kind of separation experience, not just as a teenager, but as a migrant. And
mm,
even if we're not migrants in our own lifetime, most of us in recent generations, we've been migrants. So we have a legacy, we have a genetic legacy of migrating.
mm.
So yeah, that's quite a topic in itself, isn't it? Really, about what it means to be together, what is community? And for so many thousand years, community was a limited number of people in a limited geographical area, and very few people moved from one community to another. In different ways over the last 200 years, all around the world, that has changed. More people have moved more often, and at least while oil prices were relatively low, people just simply kept on moving. The numbers of people moving this Easter has actually slowed down because you put 50% on the cost of petrol and we move less. Who knows what the future will hold? But I keep coming back to how the work we do, like the growth that we do, the personal growth we do, and the growth we do in our local communities is never wasted. It's never wasted time. It's hard work. Growing is work. There's pain involved in growing. And men's groups or rites of passage or women's groups, any kind of personal growth involves some joy, but also some pain. I'm enjoying this sort of more philosophical conversation, but I wonder if there's more pragmatic stuff around what what's ROP like, what skills do we need to organize ROP, what do we do when we have teenagers coming along, and I'm as interested as you to hear sort of what there's some research I don't know about really, like where do who's done ROP in the last 10 years, what are they doing now? Like, I see some of these young men around town, it's great to see them, but I wonder, are we and this is another philosophical question, but, are we doing stuff that really counts? Does it count for
Mm.
just a moment in time, and that's okay? Are we actually enhancing our communities in a broader sense?
My answer to that from, what I would call as close to the coalface as I've ever been is we're missing something. It feels to me that we're missing something in the narrative and how we communicate this. And then it makes me step back and ask that question of, is this what's necessary? And I do a couple of little jumps and I go, absolutely, it's necessary. It's necessary for mental health. It's necessary for youth suicide. It's necessary for male incarceration. It's necessary for families and connection and community. It's necessary for all of these reasons, but there is some way that it is not meshing with the culture right
Mm,
now.
mm, mm, mm.
And I'm curious. I'm really curious. Okay, well, share my appreciation with you, Ian. Very grateful that you came on board, man.
Well, I appreciate your work too, and I'm looking forward to the results.
Thanks, Ian. Till next time, man.
Fine. Bye.